A trucker by the name of Luke Jones was driving on a highway alone there where no other cars and nobody. This highway was basically abandoned, so Luke could just relax and pay attention to the road ahead. Hours later, Luke was still driving when he snuck a peek at his gas gauge. "Oh, fuck, it's almost on E," he said, frustrated. A truck stop sign illuminated in the distance. "Thank God." Luke said he pulled into the truck stop, filled up, got some coffee. Then he got back on the road. "Let's put on some tunes," Luke said to himself as he turned the radio DL2 on. His favorite station was playing. When decided to get some sleep, he pulled off to the side of the road and fell asleep. Luke woke up the next day, a little dazed, but got back in the driver's seat of his truck and kept on. Later that evening, as night began to fall, Luke leaned back in his seat and looked at his gas gauge again. "What the hell? I just filled this fucker yesterday. How can it already be low again? I haven't even been on the road that long," Luke said, clearly confused about how his truck got as low on fuel as it was already. Luke then jumped out of his truck and began checking the fuel lines and the big metal diesel tank itself, but nothing seemed to be wrong, so Luke just shook it off and pulled off the next exit and into another truck stop and fueled up again. Luke was back on the road, and this time his gauge stayed put. Luke began to relax once more until the truck completely stopped out of nowhere. Luke trembled. "What the fuck?" he asked himself as he tried to start his truck again, but it wouldn't turn over. Luke was scared, out of his mind. No one ever used the road he was on, so he couldn't count on someone rescuing him. Plus, he had no phone service, so he sat in his truck till morning. The next morning, Luke tried starting his truck again. This time it started with no problems, so he continued his trip. That night, Luke was jamming to his radio when his truck stalled once again. "Shit, why the fuck does this keep happening?" he shouted. Luke then jumped out of his truck and investigated. He found nothing and no one. Luke then hopped back in his truck and looked ahead, and that's when he saw someone standing there looking at him. To put it bluntly, I've had a rough life. I grew up particularly poor and with narcissistic parents to boot, who, and what I've become, should come as no surprise. I've been fascinated by the wilderness for as long as I can remember. The scenic beauty, the calming serenity. Having grown up in rural Appalachia, a great chunk of my life has been spent outdoors. It is my home. It's where I belong. During my adolescent years, I often found myself being drawn to the wilderness. It was a form of escape. It was the only time I felt in control of my own life. And by my late teens, I was an exceptionally skilled and seasoned outdoorsman. As I grew older, I went hiking and camping as much as possible. I explored and mapped countless unmarked trails. I took a job in lumberjacking. And in spite of all the lingering trauma, all the fractures and scars my childhood had left, I was content. It was my typical M.O. comma, sitting by a fire, listening to the radio. Deep in the Appalachians. A constant throughout these trips was the lack of people. This can be attributed to the remote locations I tend to camp, but nonetheless, I was fully anticipating me being on my lonesome for the entire trip. As night began to fall, I turned off the radio and got up to relieve myself. That's when I noticed it. The faint glow of a fire in a nearby campsite, directly behind where I'd been sitting the past several hours. I could distinguish the glow as one emanating from a fire, but I couldn't see or make out people. What really struck me as odd was that I never heard anything. Voices, them approaching, them setting up camp. I didn't know what to think or do, but one thing was for certain: I had visitors. After going about my business, I sat back down and tried not to think about it. Attempting to comprehend or make sense of the situation was pointless. They were here, and that's the end of it. But eventually curiosity got the better of me, and as night was in full swing, I decided to go and investigate. I began to walk towards the camp. An almost casual stroll. That was until I got to within 100 yards. I began walking extremely slowly until I reached and stopped at the edge of the clearing. Beyond the dying campfire was a tent. Only I could see the outline of two people inside, due to a lantern or some kind of light source. It was at this moment everything changed. My parents had degraded me, made me feel worthless, and stripped me of any control my entire life. All I've ever wanted is control. These people, they were in my home, my playground. I watched them. I was aroused. A million scenarios ran through my head. I couldn't tell you how long I sat there, but eventually the light flickered off, indicating they were settling in for the night. I knew that I should leave. I knew that watching them should be as far as this goes. But it wasn't enough. They needed to be aware of my presence. I wanted them to bend to my will. I calmly approached the tent, perceptive of any sudden sounds or movement. I began stroking the tent with my hand. This went on for about a minute until the light turned on, illuminating myself and the two hikers inside. They gasped and began flailing wildly inside of the tent. I was extremely turned on, and without even thinking about it, I grabbed a hold of the tent, shaking it violently. Two women jumped out of the tent, darting off into the trees. I chased after them. I can't tell you how long I ran for. But when I stopped, the woods were quiet. Eerily quiet. I knew they'd likely sought hiding in foliage or behind a tree, so I sat where I was, waiting intently, listening for any sudden movement or footsteps, but there was nothing. Eventually, I had to come to terms with the fact that they'd gotten away. But in spite of that, I couldn't be happier. I couldn't even contain myself anymore. I unbuckled my pants and masturbated right there on the forest floor. They're now scarred, the way I've been scarred. They left because of my power. I'd finally been in control of my own life and the lives of others around me. The creepy man called Barney has been secretly recording under women's skirts. Barney has always been a creep, and he has had warnings from the police many times in the past. Barney lives alone and does what he feels like doing, and he has never been able to fully function in society. He has never had proper friends and never really had good experiences. Even as a child, Barnett had exhibited creepy behavior, and unfortunately his elders has failed to help him grow. Barney is a creep who does creepy things, and now he is secretly recording under women's skirts. He followed one woman from behind and secretly recorded under her skirt by use of a long stick as well. Then when Barney had a look at what he had recorded, he became horrified at what he captured. He saw a hateful, angst-menacing face staring at him. He had no idea what it was, and even though it was horrid to look at, he couldn't look away. There was something about this ugliness that kept him glued to Thear's screen. It looked like that it wanted to hurt him, like he had wronged it some way. Then, Barney just deleted the photo. Then Barney followed another woman and had secretly recorded under her skirt, and when he looked at the picture, he became horrified again at the picture. It was that hateful and horrid face. This time it was able to scratch the phone, and when Barney tried deleting the photo, it kept reappearing and unrelenting itself. Barney just smashed his phone, and when his phone laid on the ground, all smashed up, it started jumping a little bit until it came to a complete stop. Barney promised himself that he will never secretly record under a woman's skirt again. Now Barney tried to change his ways, and it was the first time he tried to change his ways. Like with all bad habits, it's a hard thing to stop. Everything kept tempting him to go back to his old ways, and then Barney couldn't help himself and went back to his old ways. Barney started secretly recording under a woman's skirt, and when he looked at the photo, he regretted his decisions. When he looked at the photo, and it was that horrid face, it started to crack the phone even more, and when Barney tried to smash his phone on the ground, the thing was still making its way out. Then Barney tried to light his phone on fire, but it was no use. All Barney could do was run. Then one day, Barney woke up to find he was inside something. He realized he was inside some trousers. Then he realized he was a guy's ass now. This guy never wears skirts, and so no chance of getting out through a picture.